So if you want to take my Udemy course, there's the coupon code to get in for only $9. And the coupon code is Let's Go. And there's the URL. For everybody out there in internet land. What's that?
So you filmed it in your garage?
Yeah, I totally filmed it in my garage. Well, you know, I had to film it in my garage because inside the house, everybody's asleep. I can't be like, and then watch, boom, whoa, awesome. It totally ran. And my wife would be like, go to bed. Everybody's asleep when I made it, pretty much. So anyhow, that's how you get into my course. And today we are going to look at some new Go stuff. And did we see, I mean, there's a lot of stuff maybe that we haven't seen. We're kind of hop-skipping around. But this is a really nice little tutorial on OAuth and then also on other authentication that we've already done. And so you could get to this code, again, if you're watching this online, you could get to this code at GitHub, goes to 11 Golang training. And so here's all that code right there. That's where you could get to it. Pause the video if you want to see that any longer, because I am moving on now. And so here's some really great code for doing authentication and sessions. And I think that there's some cool stuff in here to review. So my game plan is just to kind of go through it and knock some of it out, and then we'll end up with OAuth. And so the first one here is doing App Engine Authentication with Go. And let's look at that. And it's going to be a review for us. So the app YAML, we have two handlers. And we have login, right? It needs to be admin. So when you go to this path. And so this is where we're sort of using App Engine, locking down our app. You can't go to admin.anything, anything after admin, unless that path in the app, that endpoint, they talk about those as endpoints. What's your endpoint, right? What URL do you end up at? That's your endpoint. You can't go to that endpoint without being admin. And you also can't go to anything in my app, right? Any other endpoint in my app without logging in. So that's how you set that with the app YAML. And here in main.go, first let's just see it run. So I'm going to launch terminal. And I'm in bcrypt, which we will see, which is awesome. And I'm going to go into O1 and go app serve. Since this is App Engine, I use the go app serve command. And now that's running. And I could go to localhost 8080. And here it's asking me to log in because I'm not logged in. All right, so App Engine's taking care of so much behind the scenes just with those little settings. And localhost 8080 is the default that you just go to when you're running local with admin. So I could log in, and now it says, welcome, test, whatever my email was. You are admin, it's false, sign out. If I manually try to go to admin, it's going to say, you're not authorized to view that page, right? Because I'm not admin. But I could go here, and I could sign out. And now if I log in again, but sign in as an administrator, okay? Or we could be like, you know, test, right? Like pho. That, for whatever reason, is really popular in that culture. Pho 999. You guys been to that restaurant? Pho 999? Excellent restaurant. Have you been down? Have you heard of that restaurant? Oh, I didn't even want to say it because it's a joke, but it's true. Sorry, tangent. Yelp. You know what I'm going to show you? Restaurant. There's the Pho King restaurant. Have you been to the Pho King restaurant? They have the best pho in town. It's so, and people like when people talk about the food. Sorry, I got to stop the joke. I'm at school, right? But isn't that crazy? The Pho King. I'm sure they made it as a joke. All right, so log in as administrator.
So how does it know you're administrator?
I just put this check here. So, you know, this is just kind of like a testing, really basic example. And if we were to build it, you know, real, we'd have people log in, and then in their account, we'd have them set to admin. But here it's just, and so now it's saying, hey, you are admin true. And I also have another link here. Go to admin, and I go there, and I can now come to admin, and I'm in admin, and it's letting me see all that, and I can sign out. That is like super awesome, cool, and that's all explained. Ruben, good to see you. You can watch the videos of what we've already done. You just missed something that was on the scale of 0 to 10 funny. What would you guys say, 7? 8? 6?
6.
6, 6. All right, that's pretty good. To do the App Engine stuff is all right here, right? And so somewhere here talks about that. If you're just watching this online, you're like, okay, how do I get started with that? And you just go through this tutorial at cloud.google.com, App Engine Docs, go, and then hit this tutorial right here. And go from Hello World straight to uploading your application if you're new to it. And you might do user service too. You could get the rest of that stuff later. All right, so here's the code for that. So we've got endpoint right here, and we run that code index. If we go to just root, and if we go to admin, we run the admin code right down there. And so when we just go to root, we get a App Engine new context. So new context is an opaque variable, and even though this is review, how many people this is helpful just for me to say this stuff again. So new context is an opaque variable. And that means it's opaque to us, the developer, meaning opaque, we can't see into it. Like an opaque piece of glass is like frosted glass. You can't see through it. So it's an opaque variable. We're not quite sure what the heck's going on in there, but you need it. And why do you need it and what's going on in there? We could speculate, but there's a lot of things about session and state and tracking which user is which user. And so we just need to put that into a lot of our code. A lot of things ask for context. And where do we see the code for App Engine new context? We could come back here to Google Cloud Platform, Cloud, Google.com, App Engine Docs, Go, all that stuff right there. And then down here, you'll find the API reference, and you'll find the docs for all this stuff in different areas in here. So one place we look is just right here, API reference, and then API reference right here. Here's my index, right? And then there's just a whole bunch of stuff right there for working with this API. And the one we're looking for, though, is new context. So I'm just going to click that and see what comes up, and then scroll to the top and see if it tells me anything. And it's HTTPS. For more information on how to write that, see that, and import googlegolang.org App Engine, right? So googlegolang.org App Engine. So we'll come back and look at that in 1 second. But new context returns a context right there. So we get a context back. And HTTP request takes the HTTP request. So where's new context? See if it's in here. So there's new context, right? So we have type context, and we want new context, and it takes in the request and returns the context. So new context takes in the request, returns a context. Well, what's a context? So we have type context. And context is type context interface. And so an interface defines a bunch of methods. And so here are a bunch of methods that a context has. Debug, InfoF, WarningF, ErrorF, CriticalF, call, fully qualified app ID, and request. And that's another interface. So again, like I said, it's opaque. We don't need to understand it, but we do need it in certain places. And so for things that ask for it, we need to pass in a context. So that's finding the docs here on Google Cloud Platform under Go. You'll also find docs sometimes like under services. There's a lot of services. And so if we were dealing with, Memcache, right, here, we're going to find docs related to Memcache right there. Or if we're dealing with data store, we're going to find docs related to data store right here, reference. Okay. But you also notice there's App Engine Data Store right here. And back in our code, we had here we have import googlegolang.org App Engine. And so we could just go to godoc.org, which is the place where you can look up documentation for the Go programming language for both the standard library and third-party packages. And we could go here and just search for App Engine. And then here's App Engine, and you can see there's App Engine Data Store, Memcache, and a bunch of other stuff. So App Engine. And so down here we see the same thing, which is, I thought this was supposed to have context. Well, here's new context. So it's organized a little bit different, right? There's new context right there. And I'm just wondering where type context is. But ABD, new context gives us a context. So we could go and look at new context here. And then we could click on that context right there. And it took us to net context, right? And that's where we see it. So this is a slightly different path, net context. Whereas before, we were at Golang.org App Engine. Kind of interesting. So that's the other place you can look up documentation. And at the bottom of App Engine down here, you'll see all the different directories, channels. So we were looking at memcache, right, which is internal memcache right there. And that memcache is different than this internal memcache right here. So that's the one we were just looking at as an example. So that's just kind of seeing the documentation. So we get a App Engine new context. We give it our request. It gives us back a context. And that context is just a context, right? So from package context, this type. And when we look at that type, right, here's again that code where it's an interface with these methods associated with it. And again, opaque variable, you don't need to understand it, but good just sort of investigate it a little bit. So we get our context, and then we have something called user current context. So from package user, there's a method called current, and it takes this context as an argument. And so if we went to the docs to look for, user, right, where might we find that? Is there a user right here? Sure enough, right? User. Package user provides a client for App Engine's user authentication service. Well, what about right here? Is there some place we find a user thing right here? Maybe under services, we have users, and then we have reference. Same documentation, two places to find it, right? So either at godoc.org, we just looked for App Engine, and then went down to the bottom and looked under the directories and found user. Or over here in the Go thing, whatever you call this, Google Cloud Platform. I call it, when I search for this one right here, I search for Golang App Engine. And then that's how I get there, Golang App Engine. So that's my services users reference. There's the documentation for users. And so here we have users current, and we get context. What is that? Current. So here's current, takes the context, gives us a pointer to user. Current returns the currently logged in user. Okay, cool, currently logged in user. And if we have a pointer to a user, we have this variable, or this method right here. Pointer to user, that's the receiver, which means string, right? So that's going to turn back to us a displayable name for the user if we want to use that. So that's really one of the secrets that I want to convey to using Go and working with the documentation, right? Is like, okay, you understand the basics of Go, and if you don't get the basics of Go, go take that course of mine, but like that entire thing of like, okay, I have some code samples, I want to understand this code sample, user current context, what's happening there, or App Engine new context. Okay, well I understand that, gives me a context, and then user current takes a context. I'm just basically getting the user and user information, whatever's stored in there, right? And so when I go and I look up the documentation, I know how to find that documentation, right? Services, users, reference, and then I do get this current App Engine context gives me the pointer to the user, which means I have this method. So we see that pattern over and over, right? Using it this way. So then we need to set a logout URL. And again, here's from package user, this method. And we can look at that logout URL. So logout URL gives us a string and an error. And it takes a context and a destination string. And logout URL returns a URL that when visited signs the user out, then redirects the user to the URL specified by destination. So how's that working? So we set logout URL. And then down here I have fprintf, so file print, and it's formatted. So that first F is for file print, and then this last F here is format printing. And so since I'm printing to a file, it takes a writer. And that writer is my response. And if we look at the definition for fprintf, fprintf takes a writer. Okay, so it needs something that implements the writer interface. And response writer, right, implements the writer interface. So here's the method required to implement the writer interface. And the writer interface is an interface is defined. It's a type that defines certain functionality, right? And so something that implements a certain method then implicitly, you don't have to explicitly say implements this interface, just implicitly implements that interface. And so Godoc writer interface, there we go, let's do it that way, because I always forget if it's I.O. It is I.O. Right? So here's the I.O., and if we look for a writer, here's the writer interface, and type writer interface, you need that method. So anything that has that method implicitly, we don't have to do anything else, implicitly implements the writer interface. And we just saw that, there's that same method right here, and it's response writer. Response writer has that method. And since response writer has that method, right, implements the writer interface, we have a res, a variable res of response writer type. So this implements the writer interface, and this is asking for a writer. That's asking for a writer. So we could give it a writer. And that's where we get polymorphism with Go. Polymorphism, poly, many, morphism, changing, right? So I could have a function here that takes, like fprintf, that takes as an argument some interface, like the writer interface, and then I could pass in many different things. Whatever is implementing the writer interface could be passed in. Poly, morph, right? Many things, many different things could be passed in, and the functionality can morph slightly depending upon what's passed in. That's kind of cool. How many people that's helpful? Cool. I know like sometimes you guys are also coding and stuff, so I just want to check in, make sure I'm delivering value. So I give file print requires a writer, and then it also requires some string and some formatting verbs. So fprintf a writer, and then some string, and then some values, some variables that get passed into that string. All right, so that's just like normal format printing. And so here, that's where this string value of URL gets put in right there. So we created Logout URL, and we assigned it to that variable. And then we're saying, hey, sign out. And right here, we're putting in the URL that you go to if you click the sign out, right? And so we're saying to App Engine, give me the logout URL. And then we're creating a button for letting people log out.
%s said that, or what's the %s mean?
Yeah, what's the %s mean? Great question. So, whoops, wrong one. So at godoc.org/funt, I think this is the package I started with when I was learning Go. It's pretty one of the most easily consumable ones. Doesn't mean it wasn't challenging to me at first, right? But it's like we have a whole bunch of different things here in the index. So we've got let me just look. Here we have prints. So those prints. So we have print, printf, print line. Well, print line, it will print whatever I ask it to print, separated by commas, and then put a new line at the end of it. And puts a space between each comma provided argument. So it's a variadic function, takes an unlimited number of arguments of any type. The empty interface means any type. And that's print line. Print will print everything and not give me a new line at the end. Printf, look at that, has slightly different definition. It's got a format string and then a ... interface. So then an unlimited number of values of any type, right? And so the format string and then the values, when we use something like printf, and I don't know if there's an example there. No. Let's see if there's any examples. No examples. So when we use something like printf, we this is pretty much printf right here, right? And we give it the string, and then we give it values, 1, 0 to many, and then we also give it formatting verbs. And wherever it sees this % thing, it knows I'm going to stick in whatever is out here into that spot. And the type of verb that it is, so s, right, means it's going to format it in a certain way. If something is s, right, just s, like what are you going to guess that it's for formatting? A string. And if it's B? And if it's B, what would B be? Bool or binary, right? And so here we have base 2, binary. And if it was, I don't know, D is decimal, %D is decimal. %T is the type, so that's interesting. You could see the type of something. And here's just explicitly a string. Here's hexadecimal, %x, right? And then if we use %v, it'll figure out what it is and use, like, oh, if it's a string, it'll use %s for us. So %v is kind of a catch-all. Okay. So that's getting our logout URL. And then we do response header set. And we set the content type to text HTML. So it shows up like as HTML, is read by the browser as HTML. And then we do fprintf and welcome and give the email. And you are admin, right? And then put in the bool, you admin, right? And where am I getting that you stuff? And so you email, you admin. Well, that's from when I got the user current, passed in the contact, gave me back a user. So you email, you admin. Let's go look at that right. Well, maybe we can just see it right here. And so current gives me back a pointer to a user. And then it has email, auth, domain ID, admin. It has those things right here. It's kind of interesting. Federated identity, federated provider. Looks like that might be for connecting with OAuth somehow. I've never done that through App Engine.
So those are App Engine defined fields?
Yeah, and so let's go look at that in the documentation. So here in user, a user is a struct. Has email, auth, domain, admin, ID, client ID, federated identity, federated provider. Struct is a collection of fields. So that's the index.
Storing that struct in Memcache?
I don't have to do anything because it's App Engine. Right? That's where it's like, okay, I get my context, pass in the request, and then I say user.current and pass in the context, gives me the user. I got email, I got whether or not they're admin. There's those other things I could play with if I wanted to. But admin was a bool.
So that's more of the opaque stuff. App Engine is storing that.
App Engine is doing a lot of the stuff for us.
Wherever you don't really need to know.
Yeah.
But you need to know which fields they are.
Yeah, because then I could then say u.admin, u.email, u.id. That'd be interesting to see what my Google ID is, and then have it engraved on my tombstone, so people always know how to look me up. So here's the last part, which is admin. So pretty similar. New context, get the user, provide a logout URL, right? And then we also say welcome admin. I thought this line is kind of nice, right? Hey, if this is true, then we'll show them the admin link to go to admin. So there we go, kind of awesome. And that is that's doing basically authentication and sessions with App Engine. That's it. That's the basics right there. And then you just build on this.